I have spent the whole of my life teaching the deep to hold still long enough to be drawn. That is the craft when you strip the guild's robes from it. The dark out there does not want to be a map. It is too large and too patient and too full of motion. Stars drift, currents of gas turn over on themselves like slow weather. The floor of a sector shifts a hand's width in a Chartrite's lifetime and a full span across the lifetime of a guild. Our work is to go out into all that motion with our instruments and our nerve, take the soundings and bring the numbers home, and ink them onto the great copper plates of the standing atlas so that the next ship, and the one after it, and the children of the ones who fly them, will know how deep the dark runs beneath them and where it is safe to set down. We are the Ulvisi. We were old before most of the talking species had words for old. We do not fight. We do not trade in much beyond knowledge. We do not reach for thrones. We measure. A young captain of some hot new empire will laugh at us, will call us the dust counters, the keepers of dead paper, and then that same captain will not move his fleet a single jump without a copy of our chart folded against his chest, because the dark does not care how new your empire is. The dark only cares whether you know where the floor is. I was a Chartrite of the first rank for longer than most species managed to keep a single government. I sounded reaches no instrument had touched. I drew the Holland drift when it was nothing but rumor, and 3 contradictory rumors at that. I corrected the old saltless run by a full degree and was hated for it by men who had built shipping lanes on the error, and then thanked for it by their grandsons. My hand is on a third of the standing atlas. I tell you this not to boast. I tell you so you understand that when I say there is one place I never drew, you will know it was not for want of skill. Every atlas carries a blank. You have seen it if you have ever held a true copy. Out past the Velmuth marches, where the long current of the coilward arm bends down and thins, there is a sector the size of a small kingdom that the chart leaves clean. No soundings, no floor marks, no drift arrows, no hazard glyphs, no depth at all. Just the copper showing through, polished and empty, with the boundary inked around it in the old convention we call black water, a heavy unbroken line, the line you draw around a thing you do not want a ship to cross. On the margin in the founder's hand, 4 words that every apprentice learns to copy without ever being told what they mean. Sounded, no floor returned. We call it the Velmuth Reach. The captains call it the empty quarter and route around it without thinking, the way you step around a hole in a floor in the dark. Not from fear, you would say, just from habit, just because that is where the safe path goes. The guild's official record, the one we give to governments, says the reach is unsurveyed, low in resource, high in transit cost, not worth the sounding. A clerk's reason. A reason for a ledger. It is the reason I gave 100 times in my middle years, to 100 officials who wanted to know why the dust counters had left a whole quarter of the coilward off the books, and not one of them ever pressed me, because the reason was dull enough to be believed. It was a lie. Not my lie, I inherited it, the way I inherited the master plate and the deep vault keys and the 4 words on the margin. But I carried it knowing it was a lie, and that is its own kind of dishonesty, the kind a mapmaker should be least capable of. We are the species that measures. To leave a thing unmeasured and call it not worth measuring is, for one of us, very close to a sin. I want to tell it properly, while I still have the voice. There is no one to tell it to who will not either disbelieve me or believe me too much, so I am telling it to the record, which keeps faith with neither. Let the next Chartrite find it. Let them understand what their hand is copying when they ink the black water around the Velmuth Reach and write no floor returned on the margin and move on to the next sector, glad to be done with the clean part of the plate. My teacher was old Mish. He drew the coilward marches in his prime and went half-blind doing it, the way the old ones did before we learned to spare the eyes. When I was young and proud and freshly first-ranked, I asked him about the reach. I had just come back from sounding the Holland drift and I was full of myself, full of the idea that there was no dark a good instrument and a steady hand could not bring home, and I said to him, "Master, why has no one finished the Velmuth? It sits there like a missing tooth. Give me a season and a sound chip and I will fill it. He did not answer me for a long time. He was a slow man at the end, slow in his hands and slow in his words, and I had learned to wait through his slowness, because the thing on the far side of it was usually worth the wait. He said, "The Velmuth is finished, Corvath. It is the most finished thing on the chart. The blank is the finding." I did not understand him. I told him I did not understand him. He said, "The first hand sounded the reach, sounded it properly with everything they had generations before you or I drew breath, and then they drew the black water around it and wrote those 4 words and made it law that no chartrite would sound it again. Not had not sounded, would not. There is a difference, boy, and the difference is the whole of it. You think the blank is ignorance. It is the opposite of ignorance. It is the one place on the standing atlas where we drew exactly what we found. And what we found was that there is nothing for us to find, except that we should not have come." I asked him what they had found. He looked at me with those white eyes and he said the only honest thing a man in his place could say. He said, "I do not know. The vault knows. I never went down. I drew 40 years and I never once needed to because the law held, and the law held because no one in 40 years was fool enough to break it. Pray you are the same. Pray you draw your whole life and never need the vault." I did not pray. I was young, and the young do not pray, they petition. I petitioned the council for vault access 3 times in my middle years and was refused 3 times, not harshly, just set aside. The way you set aside a request that is not wrong exactly but is not yet ripe. The vault is not opened for curiosity. It is opened for need. And for most of my life there was no need, because the reach sat there empty and the captains rooted around it, and the lie in the official record did its quiet work, and the dark on the far side of the black water kept whatever it kept, and asked nothing of us but that we leave it alone. Then I grew old and the need came, and the council gave me the keys. The deep vault is not in the guild hall where you would think to look for it. It is below, under the chart floor, in the old stone the Ulvesi cut before we built upward and outward and forgot how to cut stone at all. You go down a stair that turns on itself until you have lost which way is the surface, and you come to a door that is not locked with any lock you can pick or force, because the lock is a question, and only a chartrite of the first rank carries the answer, and the answer is not a word but a way of drawing a particular line, and I will not set it down here even in the record, because some doors should stay shut to anyone who does not already know how to open them. I went down alone. That is the law too. The vault is read alone so that whatever a man learns there he learns without a witness to confirm or deny it afterward, so that he carries it as his own and cannot share the weight, and so the temptation to make a legend of it dies with him. I understand that law now. I did not going down. I thought it cruel. It is not cruel. It is mercy of a cold and particular kind. The founding plates are not copper like the working chart. They are older. They are a dark material the guild has no name for any more, a thing the first hand made and we have forgotten how to make, and the soundings on them are not inked but cut deep, so that you read them with your fingers as much as your eyes, the way the very old ones read before light was cheap. I am old enough that my hands are better readers than my eyes now, and so I read the founding plates the way they were meant to be read, in the dark, with my fingertips, alone. And I am glad I cannot unfeel what I felt. The reach was sounded. Mish was right, and the official record is a lie, and the lie is older and deeper than I had let myself believe. The first hand went into the Velmuth with a sound fleet, not one ship, a fleet. More instrument craft than the guild has fielded in any single survey before or since, and they sounded it the way you sound a thing you mean to settle forever. Grid by grid. Floor mark by floor mark. Every reading cut into the dark plates under my fingers, careful, methodical, the work of a great guild at the height of its confidence, going out to fill the last blank on its chart and bring the coilward arm to completion. And every reading came back the same. No floor. You must understand what that means to one of us, because it is the thing that has no place in the craft. When we sound a sector, The dark gives a floor. Not a literal floor, I am speaking the trade tongue, the old metaphor we use because the deep behaves so much like a sea that the metaphor became the craft. But the dark has a depth, a bottom reading, a place where the sounding returns and says this far, and the dark is dark all the way down, and there is nothing beneath it but more of the same honest emptiness, and you may set your floor mark here and trust it. Every sector gives a floor. Every sector that has ever been sounded since the guild began has, in the end, given up its floor. The Velmuth Reach did not. The first hand sounded it grid by grid, and the soundings went down and did not come back. Not lost, that is the thing. That is the thing my fingers would not stop returning to in the dark. A lost sounding reads one way, and they marked those two. All through their lives in every sector, lost soundings, instruments that failed, readings the dark ate. This was not that. The soundings went down clean and clear and kept going, deeper than the reach is wide, deeper than any sector has a right to be, deeper than the arm itself, and never struck a floor, and never failed and never returned, just went on falling on and on, into a dark that the instruments insisted was still there and still readable and still down, and had simply, as far as any tool the first hand owned could tell, no bottom at all. They sounded it for a generation. A whole generation of Chartrites gave their lives to the Velmuth, and the only finding they brought home was the absence of a finding, the one absence the craft cannot abide, the place where the deep refuses the floor it owes us. And then I felt this part slowly, with my fingers in the cold, and I will tell it slowly. Then the ships began to thin. Not lost to the dark. The first hand were the finest mariners of the deep that ever lived, and they did not lose ships to honest hazard. They charted hazard, they were hazard's keepers. The sound fleet thinned the way a thing thins when something is taking from it, quietly from the edges, a craft at a time, on the long return legs, in the empty stretches where there should have been nothing, and the reading said there was nothing. A sound ship would signal that it was coming home with its season's grids cut and clean, and it would not arrive, and there would be no wreck, no debris, no distress, no last word, only a ship that had been there in the record and then was a blank in the record, the same blank, the same clean copper show as the reach it had been sounding. The first hand were cartographers. They did the only thing cartographers know how to do with a horror. They charted it. They charted their own thinning. There is a plate down there. I read it 3 times with my fingers, and once would have been enough for any other plate in my life. That is nothing but the record of the sound fleet's own diminishment, ship by ship, season by season, drawn with the same cold care they would have given a drift or a current, as if by drawing it precisely enough they could find the floor of that too, find the bottom of the thing that was taking them, and set a floor mark on it and make it safe. They never found it. The plate ends not with a conclusion but simply with fewer and fewer marks, the entries thinning as the fleet thinned, the careful hand growing more careful as it grew more alone, until the last reading, which is a single floor attempt, a single sounding, sent down into the Velmuth one final time by whoever was left, and beside it, cut deep, the 4 words that I had copied my whole life without knowing I was copying a grave. Sounded, no floor returned. That is the founding. That is what the blank is. Not unsurveyed. Surveyed by the best of us, more thoroughly than any sector ever drawn, surveyed until the surveying was eaten, and the finding was that there is no floor, and that the dark there keeps the ships that come to measure it, quietly, without violence anyone could chart, the way the sea keeps what sinks into it and gives back only the silence where the sounding should have returned. I should say now the thing I have not said, the thing every Chartrite knows and pretends in the official record not to know. The Velmuth Reach borders a region. On its far side, past the black water, where the soundings fell and did not come back, there is a quarter of the deep that is not empty. We do not chart it either, but for a different reason, not because we sounded it and found no floor, but because we have never been permitted close enough to sound it at all. And the few who drifted near in the early ages came back changed and quiet and would not draw, or did not come back. And the guild learned. the way the whole galaxy learned to leave that quarter alone. It is the region the talking species call by 100 careful names so as not to say the plain one. The ones who live there are not a rumor. They are the one people the deep itself seems to belong to, the one region where the dark is not neutral, not the honest empty dark we sound and chart and trust, but theirs. The Velmuth Reach is the threshold of it. The black water is the line the first hand drew not around the reach alone, but around the whole of what lies past it, because they understood, dying, that the reach with no floor and the quarter no one returns from were the same dark, and the no floor was not an absence at all. It was the depth of a thing that had decided, long ago, what it would and would not allow to be measured. I sat a long time in the vault with my hand on the last plate. I am old and the cold is hard on me now, and I should not have stayed as long as I did. But I could not make myself climb back up to the bright chart floor where the apprentices were inking copies and laughing, and treating the blank as a clerk's blank, a low-value blank, a blank of no consequence, because I knew now what they were copying and I knew I would have to go back up and let them keep believing the clerk's reason, because the law of the vault is that you carry it alone. And then I found the other plates. I had thought the founding plates were the oldest thing in the guild. Every Chartrite thinks that. It is part of what makes us proud that we hold the oldest true record of the deep that exists, that before the Ulvesi sounded it no one had drawn it at all. We are wrong. There is an older record. It is kept in the deepest part of the deep vault, behind a second door whose answer I had not been given, and had to reason out alone in the dark from first principles, which I will not describe except to say it took me most of a day, and that I wept when it opened, from cold and from age, and from a thing I had no name for that I have since decided to call recognition. The plates behind the second door are not Ulvesi. They are not made of anything I know. They are older than my guild the way my guild is older than the captains who laugh at it, which is to say by a measure that makes the word old meaningless. We have a name for the people who made them, though no one has seen one since before we had cities. We call them the Uru. We thought them a story. We tell young apprentices that the Uru charted the deep before the Ulvesi and vanished, and we mean it as a fable, a humility tale. You are not the first to think yourself the keeper of the dark. I had told it myself 100 times to 100 apprentices. I had never once believed it was true. It is true. The Uru charted the deep before us. Their plates are down there, behind the second door, in the dark beneath my dark, and I read what I could of them with my fingers and my failing eyes, and most of it I will never understand because their convention is not ours, and the part of them that knew how to teach it has been gone since the deep was young. But I understood one thing. I understood it because it is the one place where their convention and ours touch, the one mark we inherited from them without knowing we inherited it, the way a child inherits a gesture from a grandfather he never met. The black water. The Uru drew it too, around the same reach, around the same quarter, in a hand older than my whole species with their own instruments in their own age. The Uru sounded the Velmuth and found no floor and drew the heavy unbroken line around it, and left their own 4-word notation on the margin. Except it is not 4 words, it is one of their glyphs, a single cut figure that the guild has carried forward in a corrupted form for so long that we forgot it was ever theirs, forgot it meant anything, made it into the convention we call black water and use without thinking. I had drawn that line 10,000 times. I had never known I was copying the Uru. I had never known the gesture had a grandfather. And I could read the glyph. That is the part I cannot make peace with. After a day in the cold with my fingers on their plate, I could read the one glyph, because it is the one that became ours, because we kept its shape if not its meaning, and the shape carries the meaning the way a worn coin still carries the face. It does not mean empty. It does not mean danger. It does not even mean no floor, which is what we made it mean. It means something closer to, and I am translating across an abyss of ages, so take it as a Chartrite's best reading and not a scholar's. It means already counted. It means the deep here keeps its own ledger. It means what enters to take the measure is itself taken into the measure. The Uru sounded the Velmuth, found no floor, lost ships to the quiet the way we did, and understood sooner than we did, with their older and sadder wisdom, that the no floor was not the dark refusing to be measured. It was the dark measuring back. Down there past the black water in the quarter we will not name, something keeps account. It sounds the soundings. It charts the chartrights. Every fleet that has ever gone in to take its depth has only added itself to a ledger it cannot read, falling clean and clear into a dark that is still down, still readable, still there, and has no floor because the floor is not a place. The floor is a decision, and it is not ours to make. The Uru drew the black water and stopped. The first hand, ages later, not knowing the Uru had been there, sounded the same reach, lost the same ships, drew the same line and stopped. And in the long span between the two, and in the long span after, others came who did not stop. That is the last thing the vault holds, and it is the thing I climbed back up into the light still carrying, and it is the thing I will set down now, because it is the reason the official record exists, the reason for the clerk's lie, the reason the captains root around the empty quarter without ever being told why. Not everyone roots around it. Not everyone believes the dust counters. The Hoveth conquered did not believe us. You will not have heard of them. That is the point of them in the end, though it was not the point they intended to make. In their day they were a great and rising power, a confederation of bright hard worlds along the lower coilward, young as empires go, exactly the age at which an empire is most certain that the old are old because they are timid. They had good ships and better engines and the finest survey craft anyone outside the guild had ever built, and they had a grievance, which is the most dangerous thing a young power can carry into the deep. The grievance was us. The grievance was the blank. The Velmuth Reach sat athwart the lanes the Hoveth wanted, and the guild's refusal to chart it the clerk's reason, the low-value lie cost them, or they believed it cost them, and a young power does not forgive a cost it does not understand. They sent envoys. The records of the envoys are in the upper archive, not the vault, because the guild was not ashamed of them. The Hoveth came and they argued, and they were not wrong in the way young powers are not wrong. They said the guild was hoarding, that the blank was superstition dressed as prudence, that no responsible mapmaker leaves a quarter of an arm unsounded for a fable, that they, the Hoveth, would sound it themselves if the cowardly Ulvesi would not, and claim it, and chart it, and shame the dust counters before the whole of the lower coilward. The guild did the thing the guild always does. It did not forbid them. We cannot forbid anyone anything. We have no fleets. We are mapmakers. It warned them. It gave them the truth in the only form the truth was permitted to take outside the vault, which is the form of a strong recommendation backed by the weight of the oldest guild in the deep. Do not sound the Velmuth. There is no floor. We have been. Better than you have been. Root around it as your fathers did and let it lie. The surveyor prime of the Hoveth conquered. His name was Oth Vanek, and I give it because someone should, because it is nearly the only thing left of him, sent back a reply that the upper archive preserves, and I have read it, and there is nothing in it I can fault except that he was alive and confident when he wrote it, which turned out to be the unforgivable thing. He wrote that he thanked the guild for its concern. He wrote that the Hoveth would take their own soundings, with their own instruments, and trusted that the guild would have the grace to update the standing atlas with the Hoveth's findings, once the empty quarter was empty no longer. He wrote, near the end, a line that I think of more than I think of almost anything I read in the vault, because it is the line of every fleet that ever crossed the black water, the whole hubris of the talking species in a single courteous sentence. He wrote, "The dark keeps no secrets from a patient instrument." He was right. That is the horror of it. He was entirely right. The dark keeps no secrets from a patient instrument. It gave the Hoveth everything. It gave them clean soundings and clear readings and depth that went down and down, exactly as it had given the first hand, exactly as it had given the Uru, the most honest readings any survey ever took, every grid, every floor attempt, no failures, no lost instruments. The dark holding perfectly still and answering every question the Hoveth thought to ask. Vanek sent home his findings, and his findings were true, and his findings were that the Velmuth had no floor, and he did not understand, because no one understands until it is far too late to put the understanding to use, that a dark which answers every question and never tires and never refuses and only keeps falling away beneath your soundings is not being measured. It is measuring. It is counting. It has all the time there has ever been, and it is patient too, far more patient than any instrument, and it was simply waiting, the way it always waits, for the survey to finish before it took the surveyors. The Hoveth fleet's transmissions are in the vault, not the archive. The Guild was ashamed of those. The Guild kept the warning where the world could see it, and the consequence where only a Chartrite with the keys could feel it with his fingers in the cold. And I think that was wrong of us. I think we should have shown the world the consequence. But I understand it, because I have now felt it, and there is a part of me that wants to climb back down and seal the second door and the first and never let another soul feel what I felt. I understand the shame. I understand the law of carrying it alone. I am breaking it only because I am old enough that the record is the only one left to tell, and the record cannot weep. The transmissions thin the way the first hand thinned. That is the thing. Across an abyss of ages with everything between them changed, the species, the instruments, the very make of the ships, the ending is the same ending, cut into the Uru plates and the founding plates and the Hoveth logs in 3 hands that never knew each other, and it is always the same, and that sameness is the most frightening thing in the whole of the deep, more frightening than the no floor itself. A confident fleet goes in. It sounds clean. It signals home, grid by grid, that the work goes well, that the dust counters were fools, that the empty quarter will be empty no longer. And then, on the long return legs, in the stretches where the readings say there is nothing, the fleet begins to thin. A ship signals that it is coming home and does not arrive. No wreck, no distress. No last word, that is the part, that is always the part. There is never a last word. The transmissions do not end in fear or in fire. They end in the middle of an ordinary report, mid-sounding, mid-sentence, the voice simply ceasing between one number and the next, the way a word stops when the breath behind it stops, and then silence, and then the same silence from the next ship and the next, the clean copper show silence. The no floor reaching up at last out of the dark, it was always down in, and taking the instruments that had been so patiently taking it. Vanek's own last transmission is there. It is not a brave transmission. It is not a cowardly one either. It is worse than both. It is a man doing his work. He is reading a sounding aloud for the record, a depth figure, the long string of values we read aloud so the chart will have them even if the plate is lost, and he reads them in the flat, steady voice of a professional who has done this 10,000 times, and the numbers go down and down, deeper than the reach is wide, deeper than the arm, the most honest reading any Hoveth ever took, and he is most of the way through the string, and the dark is answering him perfectly. And then between one value and the next he stops. That is all. He does not cry out. He does not finish the number. The dark gave him every figure he asked for, right up to the one it kept, and the one it kept was him. And then, the part the Guild could not chart, the part no instrument took, the part I had to reason out from the upper archives record of what came after, the Hoveth conquered thin too. Not all at once, not in war. There was no war, there is never anyone to make war on. That is the whole and entire point, that nothing ever crosses back out of the black water to be fought. The conquered went home from the Velmuth with its fleet diminished and its pride broken and its surveyor prime a silence on a plate, and it should have ended there, a hard lesson, a fleet lost to a fable that turned out to be true, the kind of grief an empire survives. It did not end there. Over the generations that followed, and the upper archive records this dryly, as drift, as the slow movement of populations, because the clerks who wrote it did not connect it to the reach, and the Guild did not tell them to, the Hoveth conquered withdrew. Its outer worlds went quiet, its lanes emptied. Not destroyed, not conquered, not plagued. The records would have caught a plague, simply steadily less. The way the sound fleet grew less. The way the transmissions thinned. A people pulling back and pulling in and going dark not in a night but across an age. Until the bright hard worlds of the lower coilward that had built the finest survey craft outside the guild were a scattering of quiet places that no longer answered. And then a name in an old record, and then a clerk's note, and then. I have drawn this part myself. I drew it in my middle years without knowing what I was drawing, a blank. I redrew the lower coilward when I was first strength and proud. There is a sector there, modest, low value, that I inked clean and bounded and moved past in an afternoon, glad of an easy stretch after the hard work of the Holland drift. I did not know it was the Hoveth. I did not know I was erasing the last of a people who had laughed at my guild and crossed the black water to prove us cowards and been proven instead mortal, in the slowest and most patient way the deep has ever devised. I drew their grave and called it a low-value sector and went home pleased with my day's work. The deep keeps its ledger, and it had added them to it, and then it had let me, all unknowing, copy the entry into the standing atlas in my own clean, confident hand. That is what the vault holds. The Uru who knew, the first hand who learned, the Hoveth who refused to learn and were taught anyway and added to account they could not read, and erased so slowly that even the mapmakers did not see it was an erasure. And under all of it, past the Velmuth, past the black water, in the quarter we will not name, the thing that keeps the ledger that has no floor because the floor is its decision, that answers every question and tires of nothing, and is patient beyond the patience of any instrument, and waits and counts. I climbed back up into the light. I let the apprentices keep laughing. I gave the clerk's reason to the next official who asked. I carried it alone, as the law requires, and I understood the law at last and forgave it, because there is no one I would wish this on, no one I would hand the keys to a moment before the need came. And then the need came for someone else, and it was my turn to be old Mish, and I found I had no better answer than he had given me. There is a power rising now along the upper coilward. I will not name it either, not for the reason I do not name the quarter, but for a smaller and sadder reason, because it is exactly the Hoveth again. It is the Cassiran ascendancy, bright and hard and young and certain, with good ships and better engines and the finest survey craft anyone outside the guild has built since the Hoveth built theirs, and it has a grievance, and the grievance is the blank. They have come with envoys. They have made the argument, the same argument, almost word for word across the ages, that no responsible mapmaker leaves a quarter of an arm unsounded for a fable, that the guild is hoarding, that the blank is superstition dressed as prudence, that they will sound the Velmuth themselves if the cowardly Ulvesi will not. They have asked the guild formally to open the reach, to strike the black water, to declare the empty quarter open for survey and claim, and to update the standing atlas with the Cassiran findings once the reach is empty no longer. The council is old and tired, and the world has grown loud and impatient with us, and there are voices within the guild itself, young first ranks, proud the way I was proud, who have never gone down into the vault and think the blank a clerk's blank, who say perhaps the old caution has outlived its reason, perhaps the Cassiran should be permitted, perhaps it is not the guild's place to forbid what we cannot explain. They ask me, as the senior chartrite, the last who holds the vault keys and the one whose hand is on a third of the standing atlas, to render the ruling, to go down one last time and read the founding plates and come up and tell the council whether the Velmuth reach should at last be opened. I went down. I am too old to have gone down again, and I went down anyway, alone, as the law requires, and I read the founding plates with my fingers one final time, the soundings that never struck a floor and the careful record of the sound fleet's own thinning, and the 4 cut words at the end of it. And I went behind the second door, which I no longer needed a day to open, and I put my hand on the Uru glyph that became our black water, the one that does not mean empty and does not mean danger and means already counted. The deep keeps its own ledger, and I sat in the cold beneath my dark, and I thought about Oth Vanek reading his soundings aloud in a flat, steady voice, right up to the figure the dark kept. And I thought about a bright, hard people withdrawing across an age into a blank. I drew myself in an afternoon and called low value, and I made my ruling. I came up. I went to the chart floor, where the master plate of the standing atlas stands in its frame the way it has stood since the first hand, the Velmuth reach clean and bounded in its old black water. The council had asked me to consider opening it. The young first ranks had asked me to strike the line. I took my stylus, and I drew the line again. I did it with my own hand in front of all of them, the senior chartrite reaffirming the founding, deepening the black water around the Velmuth reach with the heavy unbroken stroke that is the oldest gesture my guild owns and the only thing we kept of the Uru. I did not strike it. I made it deeper. I made it darker. I made it the most certain line on the whole of the standing atlas, the one no apprentice who comes after me will be able to mistake for a clerk's blank. And I wrote beneath it, on the margin, not the 4 worn words I inherited, but the thing I learned in the vault in the old convention, plain enough that the next chartrite will not be able to copy it without finally understanding what their hand is doing. I wrote, sounded by the first, sounded by the Uru before them, sounded by every fleet that did not believe them. It has no floor because the floor is not ours to find. What enters to take its measure is taken into the measure. Do not open this. Root around it as your fathers did. The deep here keeps its own ledger, and it is patient, and it does not forget a name once it has counted it. The council read it. The young first ranks read it. They did not understand all of it. You cannot understand all of it without going down, and I would not send a single one of them down, not for anything, but they understood enough. The ruling stands. The Velmuth Reach will remain empty on every chart we draw, bounded in black water, marked no floor returned, rooted around by captains who will never be told why and will call it habit. The Cassirin will be refused and they will rage, and perhaps one day, like the Hoveth, they will not believe us and will go in to prove the dust counters cowards, and will send home the most honest soundings any survey ever took, right up to the figure the dark keeps. I cannot prevent it. We have no fleets. We are mapmakers. All we can do is draw the line and write the truth on the margin, and trust that somewhere a captain holds a true copy against his chest, and steps around the hole in the floor in the dark, from habit, just because that is where the safe path goes. I am done now. That was the last line I will draw. A chartrite knows when his hand has drawn its truest line, and a man cannot draw past his truest line without lying, and I will not lie on the standing atlas, not even at the end, not even out of pride. I have spent the whole of my life teaching the deep to hold still long enough to be drawn, and I have drawn every border worth the drawing, and the last and truest of them was the one no instrument ever gave me, the one the Uru drew first, and the first hand drew after, and I have drawn last, the line that does not mark where the dark ends, but where our right to measure it does. The honest map is not the one with no blanks. The honest map is the one that knows which blank to keep, and keeps it, and writes on the margin in a steady hand that here the sounding goes down and does not come back, and that the silence where it should have returned is not an absence but an answer, and that whatever is patient enough to give that answer was here, counting, before my guild had cities, and will be here counting, after the last of us has laid down the stylus and gone quiet between one number and the next. I lay mine down now. I will not draw again.